Well, I didn't think it would happen, but Disney finally released the second Snow White trailer and poster, and people are very
opinionated.
I'm sorry, is it
opinionated?
Or is it
opinionated?
Because in the original trailer, the one that was leaked that was playing in theaters, it was
opinionated.
And now it's
opinionated.
I guess that they decided that Gal Gadot's Gadot's delivery was a little too terrible in the trailer released in theaters and that it needed to be changed.
You know, I really don't remember you being this opinionated.
But at least I nothing against Gal Gadot, but I'm not gonna let it go. You can't hide it. The internet is forever. We now have another little gem to add to the Gal Gadot acting lineup.
What did you say?
But anyway, the Snow White trailer is being absolutely lambasted online. Everywhere. In fact, it doesn't seem like anyone's defending this film, which is also making me question why exactly Disney is going forward releasing this film for many reasons. I think that of all movies to shelve, I think that this would justify it a bit more than any other film. But you might be asking, why is the Snow White movie so controversial? Because some people have looked at this trailer and said, yeah, it looks bad, but it also doesn't look like the worst thing ever. In fact, I talked with somebody who says that they believe that this movie just looks like your run-of-the-mill bad Disney live-action remake. And I do think that even though I myself think that the trailer does not look good, that people are exaggerating a little bit, that it is the worst thing we've ever seen in terms of an individual trailer. So you might be asking, why is this movie getting so much hate? Why is this like the most hated movie that we've seen in the last 10 years? Because it seems like it's been coming out forever because of all the delays and stuff like that. And why was it delayed? Why is this movie such a controversy? And why is it going to drastically change the way Hollywood and Disney in particular is making and marketing movies? Well, I know that and I understand that. So for all of you, whether you know the history behind this or you don't, here is a history recap. Some people are saying, who really wanted a Snow White remake in the first place? Were people really that invested in a Snow White remake of all things? And do people really care about the original that much? Well, I care. It's actually one of my favorite animated films of all time because of its artistry that still holds up today and because of its importance in the history of animation and filmmaking. But it is still a movie that holds up today and that still has relevance today. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing a remake milking it. However, it is true, no one is really invested in a remake. No one asked for it. And there's nothing that a remake is going to do to permanently damage the original. So why are people so upset by this movie when they didn't really care about it or ask for it in the first place? Well, it goes back further to the making of the movie. The making of the movie is what downed it in the first place. To a large degree, it does go back to the culture war, but it also goes back to that and how that has affected various movies, franchises, and properties that people love. We're living in the IP age where everything has to be based on IP. However, we're also living in an age where Disney especially has been trying to change things to make them seem more progressive, to make it seem more modern. In short terms, we've just come out of the age of progressivism being pushed more strongly than ever. However, we are also in the age of IPs, where companies are not confident whatsoever in creating anything new and must constantly co-opt things of the past in hopes that they will make money based on their built-in fan bases. This creates a lot of problems, as I've covered before on the channel. It means that a lot of times these new creatives who have no outlet to do their own original stories will co-opt franchises to put their own spin on it and change them to be something that they like, therefore wrecking it for people who want it to stay the same. But it also creates problems in terms of modernizing these various IPs like the Disney remakes, which are supposed to be marketed on being exact reminders of the thing you like when you're a kid. For example, originally Be Prepared wasn't going to be in the Lion King live-action remake, and the widespread assumption with that is that Disney was afraid of the Nazi imagery of the original version. There's also a stronger push for female characters to be portrayed, well, strong. The lyrics from Under the Sea had to be changed to make sure, absolutely sure, that they confirmed the consent between both parties. The problem is with a lot of these progressive changes from the mindset of Disney and the people they have working of them come off as unnecessary at the very best, but at the very worst, you've got people aggravated that their favorite storylines are being changed and misunderstood by people who, well, to be quite honest, don't understand the material themselves and are making fundamental and unnecessary changes to make the stories worse when no one was asking for these changes in the first place. And to be honest, it just comes off to a lot of people as very puritanical and condescending. Everything from the past needs to be reused these days, but also everything from the past needs to be corrected. We need to find out all the problems with these things. We need to update them into the correct versions of themselves, even if people in the mainstream public don't actually agree that these things from the past were incorrect and needed to be updated. And a lot of these changes have seemed very, very unnecessary. Like they forget the core of what the things were originally, they misunderstand them, they make unnecessary changes, and they just make them worse. Enter Snow White, a movie coming out at the tail end of all of this after years and years of controversy and people talking about it. Now, what we heard from behind the scenes of the Snow White movie is that there would be no dwarves. Why? Because Peter Dinklage said something about it being offensive to little people, and therefore they originally took out the dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves and said that they were going to replace them with 7 magical persons, which everyone universally seemed to think was ridiculous. Another change that they were going to make is Snow White obviously isn't Snow White. Now, I am not a person who is always against race bending. A lot of people levied a lot of hate against the casting of Halle Bailey in The Little Mermaid. I don't think that The Little Mermaid, for example, is something that, even though it's originally a Danish fairy tale, that it needs to be in any sort of particular region. Or Cinderella, that is a story that's been told by pretty much every region and every culture on the planet. However, while Rachel Zegler has an excellent singing voice and the stature of a Disney princess, Snow White isn't even a character that's supposed to be Caucasian per se. She's just pale white as snow. So I think that no matter how many people are very vocal about it or not, most people would see this as a ridiculous change because she quite literally, it literally does not fit a character to race bend them, but Disney wants to push non-white princesses, but Snow White isn't really a story you can do with that, but Disney also really wants to milk their IPs. So once again, it's the pinnacle of these changes, that their desire to change things and correct them and be progressive outweighed, even if that made logical sense for this story. We also heard behind the scenes that it was not going to be the evil queen jealous of her for her looks, probably because they wouldn't want to push vanity and that sort of stereotype on women in the modern day. This is all stuff that is incorrect. It would actually be about Snow White being brave, loyal, and true, and that it would be about those values versus the competing looks between the two characters. We also heard that Snow White would not be pining for a prince or be rescued by him by the end. More on that in a second. And this was already causing a lot of controversy in videos with millions of views behind the scenes, talking about this movie being the peak of every problem people had with the modern day progressivism of Disney. You're doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, but you can't have dwarves because you found a reason for that to be offensive. Snow White isn't Snow White. The evil queen will not be jealous of Snow White for her looks. Snow White will not be interested in the prince. Essentially, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, that can't be Snow White and the Seven Dwarves because of, I'm just gonna be honest right here, puritanism. Like, audiences don't have problems with non-white princesses. If they did, then the Moana 2 wouldn't be on track to make $1 billion. Disney has actually done well with promoting non-white princesses. The problem is that this in particular instance wasn't a time where you could do that. And no one has a problem with casting 7 little persons as the 7 dwarves. You would give 7 little persons jobs that way, but thanks to Peter Dinklage, 7 people are without jobs right now. This is what most of the mainstream is going to see as puritanical, changes that didn't need to happen. And it's not that everyone was so invested in a Snow White movie at all. It's that this is just the pinnacle of things that people have been seeing everywhere. Things they liked from the past being changed, things being nitpicked, the incorrect things needing to be corrected by the correct versions of the incorrect things, all the while Hollywood keeps milking the ever-loving IP and finding things to change. It's not working. And to cap it all off, there were the Rachel Zegler interviews. And Rachel Zegler put her foot in it more than anyone else with the way that she very, very snarkily and narcissistically delivered that this wasn't going to be the Snow White of the past. This was going to be the new version, the improved version where Snow White wouldn't have to be saved by the prince. And you have to understand, is it that no one has ever seen anyone as narcissistic as Rachel Zegler coming from Hollywood before? No, but it's this narcissistic attitude that came from her and the condescending way that it was delivered. The elitism. People in the mainstream hate the elites. They hate the elitism of this. They hate feeling that they're talked down to, which is what all of these changes feel like they're actually doing. So Snow White just became the pinnacle of everything that people had frustrations in it. And I think it also represents things like disparaging the Snow White's desire for true love. By the way, very inaccurate criticisms of the original, because the prince actually is not the focus of the original. He only appears in 2 scenes because the animators actually struggled to animate male characters back then. And the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the original, isn't about a love story. The prince and the castle in the clouds is just representing Snow White after all her hardship, getting her award at the end of her life. There's videos out there that go into the original version of Snow White and why it was meaningful for the people of the 1930s who didn't have a lot of options, so a princess who just holds on until she gets her reward at the end was very appealing to watch. Videos from Disney adults that talk about how the original actually isn't any of the things people accuse it of being. You know, if you want to find actual sexist content or stuff like that with bad depictions of female characters, you can find that in the past, but you won't find it in the old Disney movies. Like, the reason why these films hold up so well and are still relevant to this day to be milked by Disney in remakes is because they're timeless and because they held up even as people's views changed. And that's, once again, really the problem with Snow White, is the nitpicking, the puritanism, the saying that things need to be changed. And to be so condescending in those interviews towards the idea of a woman wanting true love or wanting to be saved by the prince, it doesn't really reflect what people want these days, because we've already had so many stories, and many of them done badly, about a woman who doesn't need a man, who doesn't want love, who's all on her own. And once again, since so many have been done badly, people are tired of it. Like, going back to the Snow White trailer, it's not that there haven't already been reimaginings of Snow White as a more Joan of Arc character who's more empowered than just a naive teenager who has to survive until the end. It's just that we've seen that a million times now. There's nothing fresh about it with this Snow White movie. They've exhausted that trope. Like, back in the day, there were a lot more restrictions on how female characters could be used. Like, Star Trek is an example. Part of the reason why the executives had a problem with the original pilot of Star Trek is because they had a problem with there being a female second in command. And eventually people got tired back in those days of seeing female characters portrayed a certain way. So that's why in the 70s, 80s, and on, you started seeing different kinds of female characters, ones that were more commanding and strong. But eventually pressures cropped up, and I saw this during the 2010s, where there were demands from certain groups rather than audiences to make every female character strong. That was pushed so much and done so badly that people are tired of it. Whenever you give somebody too much of one thing, they eventually ask for the other thing. Last year, my biggest video was the one talking about how Wish was originally supposed to be a love story, at least in part. And it blew up so big, and there was so much discussion about it because so many Disney fans actually wanted the love story. There is a demand for that, but there's not a demand for this. And Snow White just kind of represents how out of touch Hollywood is, and how they're not actually giving people what they want with these movies, and they haven't been for years. They've miscalculated that there is a wide audience for this kind of stuff anymore. And while it's been proven time and again that there are still plenty of people who want to go to the movies, that Hollywood just isn't producing enough for what people actually want to see. Now, since then, Snow White was delayed an entire year after the backlash. And I know that people are trying to sidestep and say, well, every movie has reshoots. Deadpool and Wolverine wasn't even finished shooting, unlike Snow White, when it had delays for the strikes, and it was only delayed 2 months. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, just Snow White, was delayed an entire year after the backlash, and it had been done shooting. The reshoots allegedly were to change elements of the plot and apparently add back dwarves into the plot after they were taken out. And you've seen the tone of the cast greatly change, except for Rachel Zegler, who changed momentarily and then went right back into her original tone. The one that has people so upset because, once again, it's just the pinnacle of all of people's frustrations. The problem is, though, it doesn't matter that they made some changes to the Snow White movie. It doesn't matter matter what the film was going to look like in trailers. Because of the controversy behind the scenes and because this movie just seemed to be the pinnacle of all of people's frustrations, people have already decided that they hate it, which is why it's highly questionable for Disney to even release this movie. I think it honestly would have been better for them to either shelve it or just release it as it was going to be originally, because now they ironically have an incredibly dated movie on their hands, one that isn't actually reflecting what modern audiences actually want to see. Because like all Disney remakes, it's just a reskin of the original with progressive elements slapped on lazily, but it's all of things that people are tired of seeing. And it's very ironic that all of this controversy started in the first place with them claiming that the original was too dated and needed to be updated, when this movie, a year after it was originally supposed to release, is already dated, which is why it's baffling that they're releasing this. Now, I think that in the future, though, the Snow White film will not be forgotten. I think it will be remembered as a pivotal moment in Hollywood history where a lot of this stuff changed, where it, along with a lot of other things, was when Hollywood started to realize that there just was not an audience for this, and that the modern audience wanted something entirely different than what they had been pushing for years. Because Rachel Zegler's Snow White does not appear to be the worst movie that we've seen come out in the past years. It was merely the straw that broke the camel's back. We already got an article coming out talking about how the Snow White movie is going to be a setback for Disney, with Moana 2, Inside Out 2, and Deadpool and Wolverine following their new strategy of just making entertainment that is universally relatable to audiences and making billions of dollars off of that. The Snow White movie feels like a setback. I could honestly see Disney revisiting romantic storylines after this movie makes $0. I could see them being more cautious about the changes that they make to their remakes. And I'm wondering if they're going to become more wary around race bending, which some of these changes could be good things, and then in other ways I am worried that things are going to swing back too far the other way. But regardless of what happens, Snow White, releasing late March 2025, is going to become a harsh reminder that the days of this kind of film are over. Thank you all for watching this video. Do you disagree with any of my analysis here? How do you think the Snow White movie is going to change Hollywood? What kind of movies do you see getting made on the horizon? Thank you, patrons, as always, for supporting this channel. And if you want to support what I work on here, you can check out the Patreon link in the description, and I will see you guys next time.